Yeah.
Yeah, of course, I'll just say with Lucille Egglin. She was a blues singer too.
And you worked all the way up to the time with Charlie Parker.
No, well, I didn't work with Charlie Parker, but I mean, he was in Sissel's band at one time, and that was in the 40s. About 40, yeah, about 44 it was, 44, the last, and he was with Sissel's band.
And you were the band manager.
That was, yeah, I was Sissel road manager at that time.
And also Dexter Gordon.
Dexter Gordon was, yeah, played with Sissel at that time.
So the first person that you recorded with was certainly not Bessie Smith.
No, it was Lucille Egglin, a blues singer around that same time. And she also was in Shuffle Along, one of the first Afro-American shows that hit Broadway around in 1921.
And how was her music different from, they were both blues singers, but how were they stylistically different?
Well, when it comes to blues singing, mostly all of them sound somewhat alike, but the tonal quality of each one was a little different. Some was a little higher, or some was lower. Like Bessie, because I had never heard Bessie up until the time I started recording with her. And but the other, I was so surprised when I heard Bessie. She was so far above all the rest of them in that sound that she had, and when you just couldn't stop listening to her or looking at her when she sang.
Your first exposure to her was in the recording studio?
And that's the only time I saw her. That was the first and second time I made 2 sessions with her. And when I recorded with her, I went in and saw her for the first time. I was quite surprised because she was a large, attractive, brown-skinned woman, and very relaxed. Because later on I'd heard a lot of stories about Bessie and this, but she was very relaxed. I was a little nervous about playing with her at that time because her favorite trumpet player was Joe Smith, along with Charlie, trombone. And so anytime she needed them, she'd always wanted to have Joe. So when Charlie Green asked me to come down to make a recording with Bessie, I said, well, where's Joe? He said, well, I can't find Joe for this recording. So that's how I was lucky enough being in the right place at the right time that I first recorded with Bessie.
So, but then 10 days later, they still couldn't find Joe.
Well, I don't know. He could have been on the road or somewhere. I don't know, because he was in and out, and he was with Fletcher Henderson too at that time. Because she liked to always, when she came in town to record, she used a lot of Fletcher Henderson, which was the top band at that time, like Joe Smith, Charlie Green, Coleman Hawkins, Buster Bailey, Don Redmond. But they're not the whole band at the time. It was just one, because she already recorded, but her best recording with 1, 2, or 3, sometimes with the piano alone, but in most times it was 1 or 2, maybe a trumpet and a trombone, or maybe a clarinet. And she didn't record too much with the banjo or guitar, not in the studio.
When you recorded with her, I assume that everything was just run down in the studio, and it wasn't written music, or was it written?
No written music at all. When you, like now, you go in, they hand you the charts and the stands, you sit down and you play, you got the mic by you, but not then. You just went in, no music at all. The only music, Longshore, her piano player, Jenny, had a sort of a lead sheet, and she had her lyrics, and she stood up by the piano. It was upright piano too, and the wires were strung from in the room up to the booth that one, and then and we had little horns we played in, no mics. It kind of resembled a small megaphone, and so that was your mic, and you played in. And how it got into the booth, I'll never know, because it's very, very, very primitive.
These were not electronic recordings? They were acoustical recordings?
It was, I think it was, must have been acoustical, because at that time it was so primitive that you couldn't even record the drums. And that was with blues singing around that time, drums, especially when they're review. But you couldn't record, no one could record drums at that time. See, that was getting late too, because that was around 28. It was in 1928.
How long did you rehearse before you recorded?
Yeah, that's another thing. There was no music. And so when we came in, Bessie was standing by the piano, and her piano player was named Longshaw. He was there. They were going over some of the lyrics or something. So after Green introduced me to Bessie, we went right to work. So she just turned us over to Longshaw. So the only thing that was interesting to him for us to do was the introduction. So that we played the introduction for about 8 bars for Bessie, and then she would start singing. Now we didn't, and all the numbers were new. We had never heard these numbers before or anything like that, and no music. But you're supposed to know the blues. So Longshaw would give us an idea of the introduction, run over that. That's about 8 bars. So naturally telling us what key it was supposed to be in. And then after we ran over that maybe a couple of times. There's about 8 bars now. Then said, all right, let's go. Then we play that number. Then you would listen to her while she was singing, and every number she sang because she was telling a story. Like one of the numbers was Pickpocket Blues. When she played Pickpocket, sang Pickpocket Blues, you know right away what she was talking about. She was a pickpocket. Friends were trying to tell her to stop it, but she wouldn't stop it. And the next thing she said, she knew I'm in the jailhouse now. And we're right on down. So every number she did was a short story. Like the one you were telling me about when we were talking a little while ago about I used to be your sweet mama, but now I'm just as sour as I can be. So when you heard those opening, when she started singing that, you knew just what she was going to sing about from then on.
How do you account for the fact that as famous as she was, as much as you were involved with music, at least in New York City, you had never seen her? Had you heard her recordings?
I hadn't heard her recording. I had never met her, but I'd heard about her through different musicians that I'd worked with, and some of them had recorded with her. And she was very nice to record with. She was no problem at all. The only thing is, as long as you were no problem to her, she was no problem to you when it comes to making a recording.
Do you remember how much money you made for those days?
No, I don't. It was a lot of money for any money, because we were, any gig, it was somewhere between $20 and I would say $40. Mm-hmm. Seeming like it's $30 stuck in my mind, but it might have been. It was somewhere anywhere between 20 and 50 for a recording, which wasn't too bad, especially at that first recording, because it didn't take us long at all. We didn't play back to mount anything.
Well, you didn't have playback, did you?
No, we didn't have any playback.
I mean, I think that's one of the most interesting things when people, maybe you can explain, but when people made recordings back then, they could not hear the results of their work.
No, because I heard it with Betty while we were singing, while she was singing and then we were playing behind her. Why? But as far as hearing the records, I didn't hear those records that we made at that time until about 20 years later. And in fact, I'd say when Chris Albertson called me one time, they had put those through the process at that time. I think all of her records they did at that time. And I was in California at that time, and that must have been in either the late 40s when he called me or the early 50s. Because I was here to stay at that time. And he asked me had I heard him. I said, no.